Thank you, Lois. And yeah, can I also personally extend a very warm welcome to all our speakers, but also give great thanks to our sponsors, both for our summit, but also our sponsors generally. As Lois said, this is our final session, the 10th session in a very full week. It's really flown by on one level, and I know that we've raised real expectations around going digital. So a big thank yous to our headline sponsors and our associate sponsors. They've also waited very patiently because, as all of you will probably know, we were planning to hold this event in Manchester at the end of March, in the same week that coronavirus really took hold and the country locked down. So we couldn't do anything about it. We had to postpone the event. And during the summer and into the early autumn, we developed a brand called the Happy Hour series. Happy Hour being very much a way of us maintaining our online presence, but also virtual networking around key themes. And that's worked really well. And we thought, well, why don't we sort of adapt that for this summit? So I'm delighted that so many of you have participated. And in fact, one of the benefits of going digital has meant that we've been able to reach far more of you than we would have planned. We know that when we hold our annual conferences, we normally have a reserve list of about 150 people. So the fact that we can extend 300 delegates to nearly 800 is a great achievement for us. And we know that people are really looking at different ways to use access to information post the event, both through our microsite and through social media purposes. As Lois hinted at the outset, we've also designated this around happy, housing our ageing population. And it also links into the Awareness Week for the first time to put the spotlight on issues 13 years on from the first Happy report, to think about how are we designing our housing for an ageing population. And when we talk about ageing population, we're not talking about older adults specifically, we're talking about all ages and all abilities as well. So it's a great pleasure that we sum up, and our last session, chaired by Sue from the Dunhill Medical Trust, looks at making accessible housing mainstream and not just around issues around specialist housing, which we've addressed during the course of the week. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Susan Kay, the Executive Director of the Dunhill Medical Trust. And again, on a personal note, Sue, can I also thank you for your and your team's support.
Thanks, Jeremy. And hello, everybody. As Jeremy said, I'm Sue Kay. I'm Executive Director at Dunhill. In case you don't know Dunhill, we're an independently endowed foundation. We're focused on funding and facilitating remarkable research and the actions that underpin the radical social change that we all need to live a healthier older age. I'm really delighted to be here. As I say, thank you very much for inviting me to do it, Jeremy. Before I introduce today's fantastic panelists, and with absolutely no intention to steal their thunder, I just want to reiterate why we're here. These stats were taken from a report that was carried out by the London School of Economics just a couple of years ago. There are 1.8 million households in England that have an identified need for accessible housing, and over, well, 580,000 of those are of working age. So as Jeremy said, it isn't just about older people. At least 1 in 6 households with an identified need don't have all the accessibility features that they need. About 300,000 households fall into that category. And people with an unmet need for accessible housing are estimated to be 4 times more likely to be unemployed or not seeking work due to sickness or disability than disabled people without needs and those whose needs are met. So, currently, 91% of homes don't provide the 4 access features for even the lowest level of accessibility. That's a home that is, quote, visitable. And only 1 new accessible home is planned for every 15 people over 65 by 2030. So there's some pretty stark and shocking statistics there. And I think the thing that really strikes me at the moment is, yet again, we're getting a story here about social inequalities. And if the COVID emergency has taught us nothing else, it's taught us that addressing social inequalities is the #1 priority. There's an inextricable link between suitable, accessible housing, connected communities and a healthier life. And those are themes that we've heard a lot about this week. So that brings us right up to date. The government's consultation on options to make new homes in England more accessible for older and disabled people closed on the 1st of December, so very recently. And I just wanted to highlight the Home Coalition's response to that consultation. The Home Coalition comprises Habinteg, who we're going to hear from now, REBA, Care and Repair England, Disability Rights UK, the Housing LIN, the National Housing Federation, the Chartered Institute for Housing, the Centre for Ageing Better, Age UK, and the TCPA. And they're calling for urgent action to tackle the UK's accessible housing crisis by raising the mandatory building standards and to make the accessible and adaptable design standard the mandatory baseline for all new homes. And they're set out in the Building Regulations M4 Category 2. So we await that outcome with very close interest. I touched on the link between suitable housing and a healthier older age earlier, which is why we as a funder are interested in this, and taking a very close interest in it, in fact. To the extent that in our recently launched new strategic framework, suitable homes and living environments for our ageing population has been selected as a key theme. And we're going to be making our first call for proposals in the new year. But in advance of that, we've supported 2 pieces of contextual research and 2 national inquiries, one of which I'm delighted to launch formally today. The launch of these national inquiries, the first of these inquiries is the Commission on the Role of Housing in the Future of Care and Support. We launched that back in November with a panel of commissioners comprised of representatives of the spectrum of housing provision, and including, of course, our esteemed Summit Chair here, Jeremy. It will attempt once again, with the benefit of looking through the lens of COVID, to make clear the connection between good health and suitable housing and living environments and provide a blueprint for change. The second that I'm delighted to formally launch today is the launch of the Technology to Age Our Ageing Population Panel for Innovation. I'm thrilled that Professor Roy Sandbach, the former director of the National Innovation Centre for Ageing, has agreed to chair this 6-month-long inquiry, which we're calling TAPI, you won't be surprised to know, for those of you here for Happy Week. It'll follow Happy's Care Ready footsteps and engage with thought leaders, leading researchers, policymakers and practitioners over the coming months in a series of virtual hearings and visits to develop and review the latest sector innovations and develop a benchmark for what good looks like in technology for housing and care for an ageing population. We want to see the TAPI principles become the sector benchmark for what good looks like in the deployment of technology for ageing, just as the HAPPY principles have done for design. And the inquiry will commence in January. So that's quite enough from me. I think we do all know why we're here. Please follow TAPI as it gets underway in January. And I want to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Nicholas Bungay, who's the Director of Strategy and External Affairs at Habinteg. Nick leads Habiteg's influencing policy agenda in the accessible housing sector, and he's responsible for Habiteg's in-house training and consultancy service, the Centre for Accessible Environments. So with that concerning statistic of only 1 new accessible home plan for every 15 people over 65 by 2030 ringing in your ears, Nick is going to talk to us about campaigning to boost the provision of accessible homes. So over to you, Nick.
That's great. Thanks very much for that introduction, Sue, and thanks, Jeremy, for setting the scene for today's workshop. And I suppose just to say many thanks for inviting me here today, and big well done to the team at Housing LIN for putting on such a fantastic event this week. So as Sue said, I'm Nick Bungay from Housing Association Habinteg, and I'm going to tell you a bit about why we believe accessible homes are so important, the work we've been doing campaigning to raise awareness and boost provision of accessible homes, and then I'll tell you a bit about the steps we've undertaken over the last year to help kind of progress this really important issue. But first, just a bit about Habinteg. You can see here former PM Edward Heath opening one of our first schemes in London 50 years ago, and how Habinteg is actually quite unique as an organisation because we're a direct provider of social homes, and we have about 3,500 properties right across England and a part of Wales. But we also kind of campaign and we influence as well, and we actually pioneered together with Joseph Rowntree Foundation the lifetime homes concept, which some of you might have heard about today. And I suppose the principle behind lifetime homes is that really homes can kind of develop and change over the course of somebody's lifetime, reducing the need for people to move or cause real disruption in their lives when their accessibility needs might change. So it's a bit about us as an organisation, again, providing direct homes for people, but also having that influencing and campaigning arm as well. So our current stock, about a third of our homes are actually wheelchair accessible homes, otherwise known as kind of the category 3 homes in the building regulations. And then the rest of our homes are built to that lifetime home standard as it was known, or the accessible and adaptable standard as it's known now in terms of the category 2 homes. So that gives you a bit about our current stock and about how we're quite unique as an organisation. And the other component that makes us quite different is the Centre for Accessible Environments. So the CAE are our in-house consultancy team, and they provide consultancy support, training and expertise, really helping organisations to become much more accessible and inclusive. I think Jaquel Rinell is one of our CA associates is with us today. So that was a bit about the organisations. Now, Sue covered some of these points in terms of why we believe accessible homes are so important. I really think it kind of goes to the heart of why we're here as an organisation, and that's, I think, to help people like Chris, who's a Habinteg tenant from Milton Keynes. Because, of course, accessible homes for disabled people are all about promoting independence and their quality of life, people being able to use the bathroom comfortably, to use the kitchen, to enjoy their lives with their families in a home that's accessible for their needs. Kerry's another Habinteg tenant from Milton Keynes, and again, Kerry's actually been shielding since March, even when the restrictions eased, because she has a form of muscular dystrophy. She still was reluctant to leave her home, so she hasn't left her house since March, and she speaks really powerfully about how over the last few months accessible homes have really become so important to her, particularly having to spend so much time at home. So that was kind of Chris and Kerry, two of our tenants. But of course, you know, this is an important issue because we have an aging population. So really important we make sure that our homes that we're building are suitable for the population that's going to be living in them. And again, you can see here those statistics which really kind of emphasize the point that, you know, as the demographics change, we need to make sure that our housing stock is changing with it as well. So the other benefits of accessible and adaptable homes, again, otherwise known as category 2 homes, they support disabled people into work. As Sue said, a disabled person in an accessible home is 4 times more likely to be in work compared to a disabled people in a home that isn't suitable for their needs. We know that accessible homes mean adaptations can take place much more easily, much more cheaply, much more quickly, and we know that then relieves pressures on health and social care budgets. And of course, this issue around sustainable homes, we hear a lot from the government about carbon neutral homes or the future home standard. There's a real emphasis on environmentally friendly homes, but actually accessible homes are also sustainable homes because actually they're homes that can develop around the needs of families. You know, you don't need to move home or build another home if, for argument's sake, family members getting older and you need to make some of those adaptations. So again, something that we feel really strongly about there, that we need to make sure the accessibility argument is sitting alongside the sustainable argument when it comes to homes as well. So what's our current stock like? You know, Habinteg estimate there are 400,000 wheelchair users in England who are in homes which are neither accessible nor adapted. So it's clear that our current stock just simply isn't acceptable and not accessible for the needs of the current population. And again, the Insight report was a piece of work that Habinteg led in June last year, and we actually analysed local authorities' plans right across England, and we found that the majority of those plans weren't setting targets, they weren't setting requirements for accessible homes to be built in their area. And again, if we look outside of London, we know that only 1% of all new homes to be built by 2030 are actually set to be fully wheelchair accessible, to be appropriate for wheelchair users to live in all of the time. So again, it's clear there's a real postcode lottery when it comes to accessible homes. We can see why it's really important we're building them, but we know when we look at the data that there just aren't enough homes being built suitable for older and disabled people between now and 2030. So that's our kind of key campaigning call that we're highlighting there on the screen. You know, we believe strongly that all new homes should be accessible and adaptable, or a category 2 homes as they're known in the building regulations. That is actually the case in London, and some other local authorities are heading in that direction. But in large parts of the country, that just isn't happening, and there just aren't those homes being built. So that's our kind of simple change that we want to see happen, to make sure that all new homes built are accessible and adaptable, and that mandatory baseline is actually raised to make sure that that takes place. So we've been doing a lot of campaigning work to make sure that we're pushing forward with this particular campaigning ask. So what have we been doing? Well, Habinteg run an annual ForAccessible Homes Awareness Week. That takes place every September. It's been an effective way, I think, to bring the sector together to talk about accessible homes. We've had people really kind of getting involved and throwing their weight behind that particular week, and really pleased to see it having recognition and picking up a couple of awards because of the way we've been using that week to really spread the message about why accessible homes are so important. Really kind of important key component, I think, to the campaign here is we've been bringing disabled people and our tenants together with decision makers, together with parliamentarians and civil servants as well. So you can see here 2 of our tenants, Dolores and Sam. They're 2 wheelchair users, and they were meeting with the then Equalities Minister, Penny Mordaunt, last year, presenting a copy of our new report to her. And again, Habinteg have presented evidence to select committees, and we've been doing lots of hard work to really recruit parliamentary champions and ambassadors to raise this issue for us in the Commons and the Lords. And again, just last week, one of our MPs raised this as part of questions, really kind of quizzing the government about what they're doing in terms of accessible and adaptable homes. And again, those disabled people are also working with Habinteg as part of a new group called the Insight Group. So we've brought together about 25 disabled people who are really kind of sharing their thoughts and ideas around accessible homes, speaking out to the media, speaking in Parliament, writing blogs, telling the kind of human story about why accessible homes are so important. Again, research and stats has been a key ingredient to our campaigning work. I spoke about the Insight report from last year. We'll do watch out for the follow-up to that, which is being launched next week. So we're updating the data. So we'll be able to tell you, how are things getting better? Are they getting worse? Or are they staying the same? We've run some YouGov polls. We ran one during lockdown, and interestingly there, disabled people told us that the inaccessibility of their homes did have an impact on their mental health during lockdown. Again, perhaps not surprisingly, if you're shielding or if you're at home and that home isn't suitable for your needs, and of course that's going to have an impact on your life and your family as well. So again, research and statistics really important. I'm pleased to say that has been picked up by the media. You know, this is an issue that can be quite challenging to get people talking about, but actually I think we've done a great job encouraging disabled people to tell their story, to speak out. So interestingly, you know, this is a really important way to help shift that debate and help put pressure on some of those decision makers who are making decisions around accessible homes. And the Home Coalition, Housing Made for Everyone. So we chair the coalition together with the Centre for Ageing Better, and here are the 10 members here. Really pleased, of course, that Housing LIN, a really important member of the coalition. What have we been calling for? Well, of course, we want that mandatory baseline changed. We also want local authorities to be doing more, and a commitment from housing developers as well to think about the accessibility of their homes that they're building. And again, by bringing together that network of 10 high-profile organisations, we've been able to speak in one united voice. And you know, when people can hear the likes of Housing LIN or Age UK, or other high-profile groups like the National Housing Federation, then again it helps persuade more people, particularly the home building lobby, why accessible homes are so important. So I've spoken a bit there about what we've been actually doing to raise awareness of this issue, but have we made a difference? What impact has that had? Well, I'm just going to share this one point here that Sue mentioned earlier, because thanks to a lot of that pressure that we've been putting on the government, the consultation now has been launched. 3 of those 5 options include the category 2 mandatory, the mandatory baseline, being suggested that changed to category 2, and we'll know the outcome in March. So do expect to hear more from us in the coming months, because again, we need to make sure that we're raising awareness and putting pressure on the government to make sure that the end of that consultation does actually result in a change to the building regulations. So I hope that's given you a bit of insight into the work of Habinteg, why this issue is so important, the campaigning work we've been running, and finally that new consultation that's out. Do watch this space when we hear about the outcome in March. So again, thanks everybody for listening to me. Please do feel free to get in touch, because it would be great to work with as many of you as possible to really help champion such an important cause. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to the next speaker.
Thanks, Nick. I think that was a fabulous roundup of the brilliant work that you've been doing. I love the combination of the evidence, getting the evidence, but actually getting real people's stories out there. It's so powerful. I haven't got any, I can't see any questions coming in particularly yet. As we said at the outset, we've got 20 minutes at the end to really sort of, you can start to grill the panelists after that, but if anyone's got a burning question that they want to ask Nick now, they can do so. I know I've just got a quick one actually, Nick, if you don't mind. I'll take chair's privilege. How hopeful are you of a really positive outcome in March?
That's a very good question, Sue. I mean, I'd say we are hopeful for a positive outcome, because I think when you look at the government's consultation, they do make it really clear that their intention is to raise standards of accessibility when it comes to new homes. Now, how quickly is that going to happen is, I suppose, another question. We would want that mandatory baseline to change so we could see progress more quickly. I suppose the other possible scenarios is that the government still says, yes, this is an important issue, but we need more time to gather additional research. So I think we're confident that we'll get there, and they're clear on the intended outcome and the direction of travel. I think it's debatable in terms of how quickly we get there. But yeah, I think we're hopeful that, they read the weight of responses that I know have been coming in thick and fast from across the sector. So they'll see that, there's a really powerful argument in terms of why it's such an important issue.
Absolutely. There is one quick question that's, well, I'm not sure it's quick, but it's certainly an interesting question that's just come in from Bob Green. He's asking, should accessible homes include consideration of accessible neighbourhoods, including community safety and addressing disability hate crime? Yeah,
really good question there, Bob. Thanks for flagging that. And I think that's where I think I'm really pleased that the Centre for Accessible Environments are actually a kind of part of Habinteg as our consultancy team, because yes, you can have an accessible home, but actually if you can't then access your local community, you can't use public transport, then you can make the argument that, well, actually that's impacting on someone's independence and their quality of life. So what the CE have been doing is giving that advice and guidance and support to organisations, to businesses, to public sector groups, so we can really kind of realise that vision that we have of accessible homes in inclusive environments and inclusive communities. So yeah, really important and important point you raised there, and absolutely I think it needs to be kind of seen as part of the same challenge.
Yeah, thanks Nick, that's great. I think we'll move on now so that we can keep to time, but as I say, plenty of time for questions at the end. So thanks once again, Nick. Next up, we've got Dr. Gemma Burgess, who's the Acting Director of the Cambridge Centre for Housing and Planning Research at the University of Cambridge. She's very widely published. Gemma's research interests include land supply and the delivery of housing through the planning system, housing and health inequality, and the relationship between housing and ageing. She's currently the principal investigator on a research project looking at how smart technologies can support wellbeing and independent living for older people. She recently led the Digital Built Britain Housing Network, which established a research framework to challenge and influence social policy and government and industry thinking on the use of digital tools in the UK house building industry. She's now a research lead for the National £72 million Construction Innovation Hub, working with the Cambridge Centre for Digital Built Britain. So over to you, Gemma.
Thank you very much, Sue. So good afternoon, everybody. As Sue said, I'm Dr. Gemma Burgess from the University of Cambridge. Thank you very much to the Housing LIN for the invitation to speak today. I run the Cambridge Centre for Housing and Planning Research. We're a research centre in the Department of Land Economy at the university, and this year marks our 30th anniversary, so 30 years of research, policy evaluation and analysis. Our research is dedicated to understanding and tackling social and spatial inequalities. So housing and planning sit at the heart of many wider social issues. We're an academic centre, but our purpose is to carry out research that's relevant for policy and practice. So we aim to provide an evidence base for making positive change with a view to reducing inequality, improving housing conditions and improving housing affordability. Housing options to meet the needs of an ageing population are a key focus of our work. So I'm hugely enthusiastic about the potential of digital innovation. We have research at the moment on modular housing, smart cities, digital innovation in construction, digital exclusion. But today I want to talk to you about a piece of research that was very kindly funded by the Dunhill Medical Trust that we're launching today that addresses the question, how does the provision of advanced predictive telecare and smart home technology for older people affect its outcomes? Now, we've heard this week from some leaders in the field, but the nationwide picture is very varied in what is a very rapidly developing area. The research looks specifically at how advanced telecare services are coordinated and how this might impact on the benefits that such technology can offer. This evidence raises important issues for service providers such as local authorities, policymakers involved in the telecare industry to consider when seeking to provide telecare and smart home technology for older people. The research entailed the collection of primary data in order to unearth new insights about how the coordination of advanced predictive telecare services works in practice. Interviews were conducted with those involved in the design and delivery of smart assistive technology in England. This included suppliers of advanced telecare technology, housing, health and social care providers, local authorities at the centre of care provision, and other stakeholders, both public and private sector, who are otherwise involved in providing, catalysing or assessing access to predictive telecare technologies. We also talked to a small number of older people, and a second connected piece of research is being conducted with older people who are using predictive home technology to learn about their experiences. The central research questions that informed the interviews were, what are the dynamics and challenges experienced by those involved in the coordination and provision of advanced telecare technology for older people? How do these affect the outcomes of digital telecare provision? And how might coordination be improved to further develop positive outcomes for older people? The interview data raised 4 central themes that are addressed in turn in our report. What is advanced telecare technology for and how does it work? How are advanced telecare services coordinated? How does the broader national and local institutional landscape affect the outcomes of advanced telecare provision? And how does the network of responders that contribute to predictive telecare use affect its outcomes? So the first question, what is advanced telecare technology for and how does it work? So advanced predictive telecare has multiple functions and uses for older people and within the health and social care system. Firstly, it can be seen as an update of older telecare technology. Older analog and first generation telecare was primarily used by older people to alert others in the case of possible emergencies. Digital advances in telecare technology then meant that others could be alerted automatically. new advances in passive sensor technology have led to the creation of predictive telecare platforms, meaning that certain health conditions can be identified in advance without the need for users to have identified these problems or to raise an alarm themselves. Respondents to our study identified 3 potential benefits of this technology. Firstly, by predicting certain conditions, advanced telecare technology may be able to prevent the need for people to move into residential care, prevent hospitalizations. This preventative capacity has been framed as a way to promote independent living or aging in place, allowing people to live in their own homes for longer. A second function reported by respondents to the study is the capacity to deliver cost efficiencies in the provision of care by streamlining in-person care. A third function, and a factor motivating housing providers, for example, to engage in the provision of advanced telecare, is its digital functionality, thereby making use possible after the analog switch off in 2025. However, the research also identified various tensions between these different functions. Different actors and agencies involved in coordinating provision can have different priorities, different interpretations as to what advanced telecare technology is for, and emphasize different aspects in product or service design and delivery. There may be trade-offs between the preventative capacity and cost-cutting potential of telecare. For example, predictive analytics may lead to more in-person care being requested and required in some cases by older people, their family members, or those caring for them. The understanding that telecare can simply be used to save funds may turn out to be an oversimplification. Looking at the next question, how are advanced telecare services coordinated? Well, the provision of digital telecare technology is a collaborative effort between technology manufacturers and suppliers, housing and care providers, local authority social workers and care professionals, call center operators, medical professionals, family members, and users of technology themselves. This is a complicated landscape. And the nature of coordination between the actors and agencies involved in provision can affect the nature of telecare services. It is therefore important to note the dynamics and challenges associated with coordination of these services, which is not always straightforward. Different types of organizations face different constraints and have different priorities. And these various constraints can act as an obstacle to effective coordination. For example, commercial manufacturers and suppliers face challenges in achieving market penetration, while publicly funded service providers often operate under the pressure of rising demand and strained resources. These very different constraints and the relative capacities of different actors can mean that those responsible for delivering adult social care services are left unable to define the terms of the advanced telecare services they offer, which could undermine the policy goal of a preventative, cost-effective service design. Technology trials can be very useful for making advanced telecare available to local authorities and within the homes of service users. However, as a means of coordinating provision, this mechanism can produce certain challenges. Ideally, individual-specific needs should be assessed in advance of any telecare procurement, and tailored solutions for individuals found. When telecare is procured through a trial, devices are often purchased in bulk. This limits the range of products on offer, meaning that the right fit may not always be available. Technology trials can focus on asking what technology is available and what does it do, rather than starting with the specific needs of older people and asking what might be required to meet those needs. So creating user-centered telecare services through trials can be difficult, which could stand in the way of achieving positive outcomes and could limit the preventative capacity of this technology. Looking at the question, how does the broader national and local institutional landscape affect the outcomes of advanced telecare provision? Well, in the UK, the policy drive for digital telecare is based on a preventative agenda, moving on from the reactive telecare of the analog age. So one of the fundamental aims is to promote individuals' independence by monitoring their changing behaviour and identifying problems such as frailty or urinary tract infections before individuals themselves even become aware of them. But exploiting this preventative capacity of advanced telecare requires the development of infrastructure for the creation and maintenance of services. and this will also be necessary to draw investment into the industry. However, Telecare has also been framed as a solution that will allow spending on adult social care to be reduced and be made more efficient. Pressure on local budgets for adult social care services mean that local authorities can lack the funding and additional capacity for building the infrastructure that is required. The different actors involved in advanced telecare provision rely on one another, but must also pursue their own separate agendas for survival in what's a relatively new and volatile market. And this might inhibit the streamlined, integrated delivery of services. This institutional context is therefore pertinent to whether the industry is able to offer effective and cost-efficient preventative products and services to older people. And I think this one's a really important question. How does the network of responders that contribute to advanced telecare use affect its outcomes? So rather than being a simple technical intervention, telecare interacts with users' lives and is embedded in social relationships. It often involves the engagement of others, whether they're friends, family, residential professionals, or call centres. This has the potential to impact on the quality of outcomes experienced by older users of telecare. Friends and family members are not always available to act as responders for older people. Where they are available, they may need support in order to understand and cope with their role. Professional responders may similarly need support as this technology advances. The readiness of industry players to engage with smart digital telecare systems is at quite different stages. Some housing providers, some call centres, do not yet have the capacity required to make use of the advanced functionality of digital interfaces. Where family members do act as responders, their preferences and requirements can influence how digital telecare systems are used. The provision of additional in-person care may be required on account of digital monitoring by family members. The network of responders therefore creates complexity in advanced telecare provision and should be considered in service design. Design and evaluation of telecare products, the tech, should be accompanied by design and evaluation of entire telecare services, starting with individuals' initial need assessments and finishing with that network of responders who are in contact with individual users. Our findings suggest that this is an aspiration, but it is not always a reality for advanced telecare service coordination in practice. The training that is available for families in order to deal with emergencies, the digital readiness of call centres, and the capacity of local housing and care teams are all variables that might impact on the efficacy and cost efficiency of advanced telecare. So I'd like to take this opportunity to share some thoughts on our recommendations, and I'm very interested to hear your thoughts. At the national housing, health and industrial policy level, there perhaps needs to be greater clarity on the purpose of advanced telecare technology. Greater clarity about the role of advanced telecare in adult social care could be achieved through the creation of a national level strategic vision for advanced telecare provision. And this could generate a clearer policy, legal and funding framework for the design of telecare products and services and coordination between industrial actors. So the new TAPI project, which I'm sure Jeremy might say a little bit more about at the end, is a fantastic step forward here. If the success of digital telecare rests on the benefits felt by users, it should be recognised that this could sometimes be at odds with the sole search for cost efficiencies in care. And also, given the lack of funding available for small telecare manufacturers and suppliers to trial their technology, seed funding could be made available by government for this purpose. In terms of recommendations at the regional or local level, measures could be taken to ensure that effective coordination can be built and maintained between those involved in the provision of local advanced telecare services. Efforts for greater coordination in the form of business accelerators and industry networks play an important role in industrial coordination. Local authorities play a central role in coordinating advanced telecare delivery. Their capacity to play this role should be extended in order to achieve stronger coordination of services at the local level. The technical capacity of local authority teams involved in telecare provision should also be advanced so that public care services can maintain strategic oversight of advanced telecare design and delivery, rather than having to rely solely on the capacity of telecare manufacturers. Local authority care teams need to be supported in their ability to develop knowledge and maintain institutional memory on the subject of advanced telecare in what's a really rapidly advancing field. Dedicated contact points could be established within local authorities so that industry representatives can easily identify the individuals that they should liaise with. And integration is required for local policy making that impacts on the provision of telecare. This might be liaison between local housing, planning, health, social care, and economic policy development teams, in order to ensure that all aspects of telecare provision are aligned towards a consistent vision for service delivery. And finally, some recommendations at the level of specific services within local adult social care. Advanced telecare product design and service delivery should be accompanied by service design. It needs to extend beyond a consideration simply of the technical products on offer and their functionality. And service design requires consideration of all stages of telecare provision and access, from manufacturing and the role of industry players to the role of telecare respondents and their relative capacities. And service design should take place at the local level through coalitions of interest groups, including housing and care providers. Training and support should be extended to family members and other informal responders who become responsible for the monitoring of older users of advanced telecare. And capacity should be built amongst call centres and other formal telecare responders as this technology advances. And also, if the preventative capacity of advanced telecare is really to be optimised, this might require that some of the pressures are removed for funding for in-person care. This is not a replacement for in-person care. The two have to go hand in hand. So thank you very much for listening. The research and the summary and a Housing LIN viewpoint are now all available on our website. Please do contact me if you've got thoughts to share. And of course, I am very happy to take questions. Thank you very much, Sue.
Thanks, Gemma. That's fascinating. There are a lot of recommendations there, which I think is probably quite telling in itself. We've got a couple of questions sort of coming in for you right now, so I'll should we perhaps take a look at those. We've got somebody saying you've hit the nail on the head that tech needs to be part of an integrated care system and not a bolt-on to it. So it's kind of your remarks about that systems thinking that's needed. And the role of responder family or commission care will be key to the success of predicted care. I think that's somebody just reiterating some of the points that you made there. I don't know whether you've got any thoughts on what's preventing that sort of systems thinking approach.
I think it's a mixture of things. I think partly it's because this sits in silos across housing, planning, adult social care, health. I think it's also because the technology is advancing very rapidly, and therefore it's hard for everybody to keep up. Everybody's very used to the old analog technology. This new technology changes all the time. Products change, the technical capacity changes. And also, everybody involved in provision is under huge pressure, both budget pressure, capacity pressure, and skills pressure. So I think it's a mixture of factors that creates pinch points that makes it very hard to take a systems thinking approach when this is across many different organisations and needs to involve users themselves who have very different needs.
Actually, and same individuals gone on to say, to ask how visible are your recommendations to ADAS? Have you managed to sort of talk to ADAS about them?
No. I mean, we held an industry roundtable and we put out several invites. This was at the stage when we were developing the recommendations. We launched the research today alongside the Housing LIN viewpoint. What we will be doing now is trying to socialise these recommendations among the sorts of policy networks as we go forward. And today's a good step on that journey.
Absolutely. So, Jeremy.
I just thought I'd come in if I was allowed to. So, you mentioned ADAS, and that's a really good question. Actually, in between this afternoon's happy hour session and this morning's happy hour session, I've been part of the ADAS's commission on looking at the long-term future of telecare and telematics. So I actually posted the viewpoint in the chat room as part of their conversation, which they're doing in conjunction with the TSA. So again, another important commission, which will be publishing, I think, in February or so. So again, I would say let's make sure we position this, because I think the points that you made in the recommendations are things that they're really trying to tease out and make sure that they affect not just policy, but also implementation and actually not just sit on the shelf, so to speak. So no, really good point, and look forward to working with you on that, and of course your involvement in TAPI too.
Yes, absolutely. So I think, I mean, this week's event, I think, is a really important way of bringing those conversations together.
Absolutely. And if there's anything we can do to help with that, we should talk. Just one more quick question, actually, from Sheila Peace. Can Gemma tell us when the work with older Telecare users will be available? And will you learn more about the forms of ongoing monitoring of aspects of their lives and how people consider the ethics of this surveillance?
So what we're hoping is that our research funding runs until September next year. And we've had initial conversations with people who are going to be given some tech to trial. So we've had conversations with them before that happens to get a sense of what their lives are like. Now, we're housing researchers. We're not going to be measuring anything with sort of quantitative data. What we're trying to understand is, how do people feel about the tech that they've been given? How does it fit into their daily lives? How do they use it? How do they feel about it? How do they feel about the monitoring? How do they understand it? And they're the sorts of conversations that will be happening. So the plan is to talk to people before they get it, shortly after they've got it, and then when they've been using it for a longer time. So we're not trying to understand exactly what did it do for them. We're trying to understand, how did they feel about it? What difference did it make perhaps to their quality of life? How did they feel about having some tech that collected data about them that somebody else was perhaps in charge of? So we're hoping that this will be wrapped up by September next year.
September, okay, all right, thanks very much. I think, as I say, to keep this moving along, as I said, more time for questions at the end, and there's a couple more coming in, but I will get to those, I promise. So now, next up, I'd like to welcome a pair of speakers. We've got Mark Slater, who you've seen pop up just now, who's a director at Arcadia. Mark's an architect and specialises in developing innovative solutions to complex problems throughout all project stages. His experience ranges from large-scale extra care housing schemes, retirement housing, affordable housing, and champions inclusive design solutions throughout Arcadia. His colleague Catherine Gundry, who's going to join us in a little while, specialises in accessibility and inclusion. She's leading Arcadia's practice-based research programme, and she works closely with several councils and universities. So without further ado, over to Mark and Catherine.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sue, for the introduction. And yeah, we have the honour of being the final speakers of the week on a fantastic week that Housing LIN have put together. So thank you very much for everyone who's organised this. And we've put together a presentation on inclusive accessible design in a reaction to COVID guidance. And this is sort of based on both our professional experience and our own personal experience of living with people classed as vulnerable throughout the COVID periods. So due to people spending more time at home over the course of the pandemic, I think there's been a realisation of how inappropriate many homes are to live in during the pandemic. And this is absolutely magnified when you look at accessibility and inclusivity. We feel there's huge room for improvement, and with relatively small adjustments to housing design, housing can be vastly improved to be made more accessible and therefore more resilient to living through pandemics. We really believe that the time to address these issues is now, and the design priorities need to change to improve both physical and mental well-being of the occupants. So we're going to look at three sections this afternoon. First one's going to be a very brief introduction to wellbeing in relation to the built environment. Then we're going to look at the current situation with accessible housing, which Nick sort of touched a lot on in his presentation earlier, so we won't spend too long on that. And then finally, Catherine's going to take you through what changes can be made to the design of housing, and that's the main area we'll focus on this afternoon. So firstly, well-being. So what is well-being? And I think Age UK provide an excellent definition of what well-being is. Well-being encapsulates how we are faring in all domains of life, including financial, health, social, personal, and the local environment. And we've looked at how this is applied to the home environment and believe there are 7 key contributing factors to create holistic well-being design. So these are access, community, inclusion, sustainability, fabric, and security. And these can be applied to both new build housing, which can address these issues from the start, and also an existing properties where you can look at adaptations to improve different aspects, or to use the adaptations to improve more than one of these at the same time. So well-being can be severely impacted by the current housing situation. So 80% of homes are in a non-decent condition, which will obviously impact the well-being of the occupants. I think well-being needs to be at the forefront of housing design, and this has become increasingly clear over the last 9 months, where people are spending so much time in their own homes. I think occupants residing in a non-decent home over the last 9 months will have experienced a reduction in well-being. And even more so if their house does not meet their basic accessibility needs, which I think Nick pointed out is a huge number of homes. And there's also beyond the well-being and sort of living condition argument, there's also a fiscal argument, where the cost of not looking at well-being is substantial to the NHS at sort of 1.4 billion every year. So just I'll touch on the current situation. So give you a few stats. So 91% of homes do not provide basic accessibility features, and an estimated 400,000 wheelchair users are living in homes that are neither adapted or accessible. So these figures are astronomical, really, and it's quite unacceptable in 2020 that we're living, with such poor housing. And as previously discussed, much of the 29 million existing houses are unsuitable. And I guess the good news is there are plans for 1.5 million new homes to meet population demand. Now you think that would be good for accessible homes, and it would make sense to future-proof all of these for future occupants, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So the situation is not actually going to improve that much in terms of the 91%. We're not going to get that figure rapidly higher that quickly, which is makes for pretty bleak reading. So more bad news, I'm afraid. I seem to be the bearer of bad news at the moment, but very sorry to say this isn't going to be the last pandemic we face. The way humans and animals coexist sort of makes for quite easy transmission. The sign points to similar global pandemics in the future, and so forth. If we don't adapt design to deal with these events, we're going to spend more time in lockdown in our homes, which are not designed appropriately to mitigate the spread of future pandemics. And then for the pandemic will spread more easily. So there's sort of a vicious cycle here, that our lifestyles of 9 months ago, with the sort of standards of the current housing stock and the sort of standards proposed for new build homes, that we're going to keep coming in and out of these lockdown situations. And I also think it's about a change in mindset about what an accessible house is. I think a lot of the times, certainly in our experience as architects, you have a percentage of M43 houses you have to provide, but I think it doesn't look at the bigger picture that an M43 house is actually better for everyone, and having that additional space and better accessibility is better for people in all walks of life, and doesn't just focus on one particular user group. So we're in the unfortunate position that housing and future housing does not meet basic accessibility needs, which in turn makes it worse for dealing with the type of pandemics we're experiencing at the moment. But I'm now going to hand over to Catherine, who's going to run through some solutions to this issue with some relatively small steps.
Hello everyone. So I'm going to look at kind of the priorities and opportunities that there are. So I'm kind of the happier side of this presentation potentially. So at the outbreak, as Mark said, we were surrounded kind of by family, friends and clients who were struggling with their housing. And kind of on a personal note, I had nurses, teachers, people with disability, carers, all in my kind of immediate family circle who were struggling. So we started doing a lot of social media posts, and I apologise if you've already seen them. It is going to be going over them again. And we went on a room by room approach to design and how had COVID affected it, how had it affected our priorities and had space changed. So we were looking at the new concerns associated with COVID. And these are kind of our recommendations, and they are mainly focused on new build, but there is the opportunity to integrate these through adaptation and retrofit into existing housing. So the first one we kind of looked at is as you enter the home and cross-programming of spaces. And again, as Mark said, we really want to highlight that this isn't just a benefit for accessibility, disabled design, or aging population. It is an improvement for everyone. So we are kind of moving in flats and houses to a lot more open plan spaces. And this can be a problem for noise and with a lot of activity going on when you've got multiple occupants. So we were looking at scenarios where, and it kind of came from key workers, where they can come in and put their clothes straight into the washing machine. So people working in the NHS were asked to put them in special bags, and there was a massive appeal to make these bags and put your clothes straight in the wash. So by kind of cross-programming space, so a space that would have been a store cupboard having drainage in from the outset, it means that we could make more efficient use of our floor space. And that also goes into kind of, you could put a dishwasher in the kitchen, etc., etc. It has knock-on effects. And a big part of M42 is having accessible washroom or kind of a shower facility in the entrance space, kind of on the ground floor or entrance level. So we really advocate this because with key workers, some of them wanted to get undressed when they got home and get straight in the shower. They need to be able to wash their hands. I think we've all heard, what is it, face space over and over and over. So I think by having this, it is an improvement for all. It also means that on a day-to-day standard, if you have someone who asks to use your facilities, they don't have to go all the way through your house. So it's really important that we have this kind of available to people. And one employer at Arcadia also kind of hypothesised that it doesn't have to be at the front door on old buildings, it could be near a back door. As long as it's on the ground floor and it's accessible, it's still an improvement to housing stock. So next, obviously we've advocated for a long time larger circulation, and have advocated kind of the cross-programming of circulation spaces, them being more about social interaction as well as accessibility and as well as circulation. But it's also kind of, it's been proven that we need it for social distancing, and in every setting really, not just in homes, but across all different typologies. I think it's also something that we kind of neglect is human nature. People don't walk on the edge of corridors, as our little infographic shows. People generally walk a bit further in, and we're expecting them to be socially safe. So by increasing floor spaces, you can get wheelchair turning circles and kind of a better environment for all. Materials and surfaces are a difficult subject, mainly due to financial reasons. But there are certain materials that don't let bacteria and disease live on them as long, for example, copper. And we saw in the news about tin cans having COVID live on for days on them. And I think it's the same with all our surfaces in the home, and we have to consider how we design these. And we have to consider when you've got multiple occupants living with vulnerable people, or people trying to isolate with others, they have to be able to touch the same surfaces as safely as possible. So that's like handles, switches, kettles, taps are all shared surfaces, which we need to consider how we design to make them as safe as possible, which kind of goes on to the next bit, which is technology. I'm from a very techie house. My partner loves tech, so we have smart speakers controlling our lights and whatnot. Doesn't always work, but I think moving forward, this will be an essential part of design. And we have a lot of our clients already asking for this. So on some of our disabled adaptation projects, we've had smart toilets, sensor taps, integrated smart lighting, integrated speakers, which is really reducing that chance of transference of surfaces. But I think it's important to say, like with materials, there is many considerations. So cost is one, but also this isn't necessarily possible across the country, as a lot of it requires good internet connection. And until we have kind of a consistency across the country, it won't be possible everywhere. And then I don't know about many other people, but whilst working from home, I move my furniture around 3 times to try and get the optimum working environment. And the one I settled on was my desk by a window. So having views of active scenery is fantastic for health and productivity. And we need to start considering how we design our floor spaces to be flexible and allow other uses. And this again comes back to the cross-programming element. So my personal flat looks over a road and it's quite a good active frontage to look at. We're not all lucky enough to have a beautiful landscape with trees and a river, but it is a high consideration. So cross-programming came up under exercise really for us when we were reviewing the home. Many of us were watching Joe Wick, and he's lucky enough to have an empty room to do his exercise in, but moving your furniture every day to do your exercise isn't always viable. It's not possible for everyone, and exercise can be massively important to people regardless of their ability. So a priority is looking at space differently. How do we cross-program space to make sure that it can be an office, it can be an exercise class, it can be a gym, it can be a classroom for your kids, it can be a workspace for anyone. So we kind of want to change the way we look at use of floor spaces, and I think that ties into legislation, and it can be quite rigid due to the different town planning laws. And finally, we went through the home and out into the urban realm, and we were looking at accessible streets, which was one of the questions that came up. And we were saying that it's not just about the home, it is about the wider environment. And how do we keep separation distances for kind of pandemic design, but also improve accessibility? So if we have wider pavements, that is a benefit for all. It also means that cyclists can be safer. And this could be through reducing road widths, which I will touch on again in a sec. So this is not a conclusion, I suppose it's more like a thematic sketch of our thinking of the time. And we were looking at, what about movable walls? How do we view partitions? And we wanted to highlight the areas which are underused, such as the bed in the bedroom is only used at night. So that's a massive amount of floor area which could be lost. So we were kind of theorizing that maybe it's how we view furniture as well as space, and how we change our views on what flexible design should be, and how that could make more accessible mainstream housing kind of fit for all. We also, on a kind of a different level, we're thinking about the spaces above our heads and how that is unused, and whether that could be kind of part of storage in certain areas, which is kind of highlighted in red. So this was kind of just a sketch to summarize all of our thinking of the time. So when we were looking at the urban realm, we wanted it to be integrated into areas for social interaction, safe play, reduced cars, increased vegetation, outside gyms, really focusing on all the issues that were coming to light. And this sketch kind of shows an idealistic view of what the street could be. This won't necessarily be fit to all areas, and if it is a retrofit idea, it would have to depend on what is existing. But for new build estates, this is kind of our proposal. So an example, what we're trying to highlight is that improving accessibility is actually, like Mark said, improving it for everyone. And this is an interesting example of our kind of current situation, where it can be quite dangerous for pedestrians, as they've got quite a long area to cross. The cars are very close to the roundabout, and the crossing is very close to the roundabout. And it's not ideal, and it's actually kind of uncomfortable for everyone. And with some small changes, it can be beneficial to everyone. So a larger refuse area with planting can make a more attractive street scene, but it also moves the pedestrians away from the roundabout. It is safer, and the area they have to cross, the danger zone, is less. So it's really important to highlight that these discussions need to be collaborative. It needs to be between everyone involved in order to create a model that works, and we need equity, inclusivity, accessibility in all of our design. We need to be looking at innovative, resilient housing typologies, which are aspirational, feasible, viable, and equitable. So Nick's already touched on this. Is the raising accessible standards was last week, the deadline. And we really are trying to advocate sustainable housing, which is safe, comfortable, and barrier-free. And this hopefully in March, the change in legislation will kind of be a step towards that. At the moment, Arcadia is involved in a lot of stock analysis on existing buildings. So we are advocating that it is possible to try and use this as retrofit. So this is our chance to redefine housing to create a truly accessible, inclusive environment. Thank you, everyone.
That's great job. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I think we've got some questions coming in thick and fast. Jeremy's popped up again. So does that mean you have something to say, Jeremy?
I just wanted to join you on the panel, so
Okay.
please fire ahead soon. I know on this occasion I'm just going to sit here and I will say a few words later. Okay,
great. Okay, so we've now got all of our fantastic speakers, as Jeremy said, back as a panel, and they're all waiting to answer your questions. Actually, there's one that's come in from Ian, and he's asking, and a couple of our panelists have touched on this, but is there scope in Part M of the building regs to include a requirement that housing of more than one story enables people to genuinely live on the ground floor? That is, to have a proper accessible bathroom, an equally accessible bedroom and a kitchen on the so that the upper floors can be used for a lodger or a living carer when stairs become less viable. Is that something perhaps you could touch on, Catherine?
So yeah, definitely. At Arcadia, we have been developing our accessible housing stock, and at the moment we have got houses in planning which meet all of those criteria, I'm glad to say. And it is, I think at the moment it is quite limited by developers and the requirement and what is seen to be selling well. But I think fingers crossed, the new regs that will be coming out, there'll be a much wider range of kind of housing types and typologies, and hopefully we can kind of get these half levels. I think at the moment building regs are very seen as tick box, and they were never meant to be. They're meant to be a guide to kind of what is legal and what kind of meets the government's requirements. So yeah, I advocate a half level in these steps, and I think that has to be developer led though.
Yeah, okay. Nick, have you got thoughts on that?
No, I think nothing further from me. So I think Catherine summed it up really well there. And again, yeah, interesting question I think that was posed. And yeah, I think we'll have to wait and see what happens in March. Certainly, some of the options in the consultation did talk about, looking at the standards again and thinking about some of those kind of different components that have been coming up today across the presentation. So I think we'll have to see what they come out with in March. But I think Catherine summarised it really well.
No, absolutely. Thanks.
This morning we had a session with the London Rebuilding Society who retrofit properties in that way. So again, it may be worth having a look at Naomi Kingsley's slides as well.
Okay, all right. So I've got a couple more questions coming in here for Gemma. This is from Martin Hodges. Gemma, do you see that the challenges for advanced telecare services for older people living in their own homes and dispersed around communities are different from those who live in specialist accommodation?
Yes, I think probably the challenges are a bit different. If you're living in specialist accommodation, you've got an infrastructure already around you, you've got a landlord, you probably pay service charges in which there'll be certain provision around maybe support. So I think that's quite different, and therefore if you're in specialist accommodation, people can make a considered decision maybe to provide certain types of technology en masse. They know their tenants perhaps, and there's an infrastructure there. I think for people who are out in the community, it's very individualized. They may be relying more on maybe a local authority to recommend what products they get. And I think these are questions that the TAPI inquiry will need to think about. What do the different communities of older people look like, and how might their needs be different, and therefore what different infrastructure and services are going to be required to meet those needs. I think it's quite different if you're living by yourself, maybe you bought some tech yourself and you're maybe hoping that your family are going to monitor that and look after you, rather than living in accommodation where you've got a responsible landlord who you have a reciprocal relationship with. I think that's quite different.
Yeah. And a sort of a follow-up to this, are there recommendations in your report on future-proofing technology and developing infrastructure that's going to be both adequate for now, but is going to be good for the future too? Is this something that we should be looking at in the TAPI inquiry as well?
Absolutely. I think it's quite right. I think one of the issues with the tech is some of the people we interviewed said, you know, we find a great piece of tech. Next year it was a startup. It's not available anymore. And systems, there's no interoperability necessarily between systems because they're market products, and they are, you know, the manufacturers don't necessarily make their products so that they talk to a different type of product. I think that's quite an issue. It's a very volatile market, it changes a lot. Products change rapidly. There are a lot of startups. And I think the infrastructure, you know, we're moving to 5G, but equally we've got very poor broadband nationally. We're not going to meet our target for high-speed broadband rollouts. We've got much lower broadband penetration than many countries across Europe. Thinking about how we manage these things, I think is going to be really important going forward. And they're not just questions about tech, they're questions about that bigger infrastructure and who's responsible for it.
Absolutely. This is an interesting question. This particular question is around Telecare products, but actually I wonder whether we could extend that into housing and the kinds of housing that you know we aspire to in the future. So Katrina is saying she's found the idea that some of the Telecare products are viewed as ugly or medical, and it can be difficult to persuade people to use them. And I just wondered what people thought about, you know, how we can try and persuade people to use them and for them to be seen as, you know, to aspire to use them, so that they're sort of seen as desirable or cool. But I think as well I think that extends into housing and the sort of housing that we aspire to for the future too. Have people got thoughts on that? Catherine, maybe.
So this comes up a lot. We've done a lot of DFGs. Disabled facilities grants, so shouldn't shorten it. And I've had a lot of clients who kind of are, they will do it because they are told to by their OTs, but they don't necessarily want to, and they are really worried about the effect on the value of their homes. And this has come up a lot in the research. And there are some amazing companies out there. I think Motion Spot, they're doing really good work, but it's not necessarily affordable yet. And it shouldn't be that you can only have beautiful adaptations if you can afford it. And that's something that we really need to address as an industry. And that will come in time. I'm hopeful that if more people kind of ask for it, there is the ability that the mass demand will be there, and then you will get the savings as it is kind of developed. But yeah, it is a problem. And although we are slowly addressing it, I think it needs to be addressed quicker, definitely in construction.
Okay. Actually, we should probably give a bit of a shout out to Invisible Creations, who are doing some great work in this area as well.
Yes, we heard from them yesterday afternoon, and you're absolutely right, Sue.
Yeah, they're also featured in the report that Zinc have published today on developing products and services for an aging population.
And they are the cross programmers that we need, because they have kind of grab rails which are plant pots, and it's really reconsidering what we want from our adaptations. Yeah,
absolutely. Gemma, you got thoughts on this?
Yes, I mean, I think some of this is about what we're used to. So those of us that are people who are used to maybe wearing a Fitbit, you know, sending data to their phone and monitoring their own sleep. You know, as those people age, the idea of having a wearable checking your data will be the norm, but it isn't at the moment. And one thing that was a bit surprising or disappointing is we talked to some providers who were trialing tech with their residents, and they were a bit disappointed. They were hoping that the tech that they were trialing might look a bit better, and they still felt that perhaps some manufacturers were taking a very technical kind of view of developing this, rather than thinking about users who have to wear it, look at it, have it in their house. So I don't think this problem has gone away, even with advanced telecare products.
Mm.
I think, Gemma, you hit the nail on the head for me. And I think one of the things we said at the TSA ADAS Commission at lunchtime was that for tech, many of us in the system have been doing it for dependency rather than independency. So in fact, we're recreating medical models, and that is going through into the type of fascia boards and others that our equipment has. And that extends to aids adaptations, as Catherine highlights, and community equipment as well.
Absolutely. So we haven't got too many questions sort of coming in now. So I don't know if that's an opportunity, Jeremy, for you to say, sorry to put you on the spot, but to say a bit more about TAPI.
Oh yeah, I'll be delighted to. Technology to aid our ageing population, as Sue said, is a play on the HAPPY principles. And for those of you who know, it took about 10 to 12 years for HAPPY really to become embedded into sort of understanding more about mainstream housing for accessibility. But as we know from work from Gemma and others over the years, and I think Gemma, your viewpoint talks about the Utopia project and the whole system demonstrator sites, shows that we need a much better integrated approach where technology is the enabler and the integrator, both in terms of the what types of systems and products we've got, but also the service redesign to deliver better outcomes for households of all ages, not just older people. So TAPI really is an attempt to think about what type of framework we want to scope out to enable that integration that Gemma highlights to be available, so that there's closer interoperability across housing, health and social care, both in the service provision, but also in the way we design the physical fabric as well as the social fabric in terms of maintaining social connections. And through the week, we've heard a lot about digital exclusion, how important digital and contact has been through COVID to reduce loneliness and isolation. But also what we know is that the Home of 2030 competition that was announced last Friday sets out some clear challenges for government and Homes England and others to look at much more integrated building solutions that can be care ready, but also be tech enabled, both in things like offsite manufacturing. And I'm sure Mark will have a lot of experience, and Nick, in terms of build structure, in terms of both the housing management, but also when we're looking to design and build new homes and how we can put tech right in at the outset. For many years when I worked in frontline housing services, everybody talked about category 5, category 6 cabling. I think, we probably still need some of that for some M&E purposes, but actually with digital, we also need to think how our building management for heat recovery, for thermal comfort, some of the stuff that Alan Lewis of Manchester has developed around thermal comfort and insulation, right through to delivering care and support.
Thanks. I think, there are so many people who just might not be asking questions, but commenting just on just how urgent and important some of these issues are. So I don't know, Nick, perhaps I can put you on the spot and say, for all of us here who are, passionate about this sort of thing, and as our sort of expert on campaigning for these things, what would you encourage us to do? What sort of 2 or 3 things would you be encouraging us to do so that we can start to see these changes start to become mainstream?
Great, thanks, Sue. Again, it's a shame the government's consultation's just closed, because I think if you'd asked me that a couple of weeks ago, I would have said, get your response in. I mean, what we now need to do is just make sure that, we're not quiet about this issue between now and March. So it's really important, I think we do still make a noise about this, so when the government do look at the data and they come to a view in the spring, that we get the result that we might be looking for. So what would that look like? I mean, people could consider doing things like writing to their local MPs and asking that they write to the MHCLG about the consultation, and setting out why people believe it's important that Cat 2 does become the new mandatory baseline. We've got our new report, the second version of the Insight report, coming out next week. So again, there'll be lots of data there. I'd encourage people here today to download that from the website and use that within your networks, send it out to people, try and get them engaged in the campaign. And again, things like social media as well. I mean, I think thanks to social media, we did actually see a good response rate to the government consultation. So that's probably my kind of third kind of set of advice there. I think if people in the group today are quite active on social media, as I know that many of you are, having looked at the names of the participants today, then please do share our data that's coming out next week, share information about the Home Coalition that I spoke about earlier. I think as many people as possible that kind of do shout about this through their online networks as well. That kind of helps just create that movement almost in terms of shouting loudly when it comes to accessible homes. And I guess lastly, sorry, so I'm going over and above your three. I'm sorry. The last one I think is really important, and I think it's been running through all of the presentations today, and that's about lived experience and making sure that we're doing as much as we can to share those stories from older people, from disabled people, about the impact that accessible homes will have on their quality of life. We know that the disability strategy is coming out in the spring as well, so again, really important that the government kind of consider that when they publish that piece of work, because accessible homes has got to be at the heart of that strategy. We're not going to be able to move forward when it comes to health, employment, anything else, unless we've got accessible housing rights. So yeah, perhaps if people could be aware that that strategy is on the way as well, and again, writing to your MP about it, sharing information, making a noise on social media, all things that will help.
I think the other thing, sorry to interrupt again, Sue, is Nick's work has been really fundamental through the Home Coalition. There's a 7-point charter, and one of the charter looks at accessibility, but it also looks at how local authorities can adopt local accessible housing registers and things. Now, we haven't focused on those in this summit, but there's a number of other key points, Nick, I think, which are really things that we can take forward in 21.
Yeah, absolutely, and we'll be setting out as part of the Home Coalition, our plans for the future, hopefully in the coming months or so. And I think you're right, Jeremy, that local component is a really important one. And I focus there on some of the national things, but actually, even if the rules do change, it may still be the case that when it comes to Category 3 homes, it'll still be up to those local authorities to set those targets and requirements. So thinking about training, education, tapping into local networks so people can understand the building regulations, how to assess local demographics and population need. Yeah, Jeremy, I think you're absolutely right, and hopefully we might be able to think about pulling together a session in the future that could just kind of tackle that issue. It's a really important one.
Yeah.
Very good.
So it's been a fantastic week. I'm quite conscious that now we're the only people standing between you and your Friday night cocktail. But we really, really do need to thank Jeremy and Lois and Jerome and everybody that's been involved in putting on that. What's been a spectacular week of online conference. It's been wonderful. So thank you, Jeremy. Here's your opportunity now to sort of sum up the week and your experience with it. And it only remains for me to thank the panelists for what has been a really, really enjoyable session. And thank you once again for allowing me the privilege to chair it. Thanks.
Thanks, Sue.
Well, Sue, on behalf of the panel, also thank you for sharing it so expertly. And you mentioned the cocktail. Well, this is happy hour. So I hope you all have something by the side of your desk or wherever you're sitting shortly anyway. But in summing, I just have a few words, really. I don't want to go on for ages. First of all, thanks to all the 30+ speakers and chairs for the whole week. You've both kept things flowing beautifully, but also I think the contributions, both from the presentations, but also the discussions, have been really rich. I've learned loads and loads from everybody, and each session has been different, yet also built on from each other. So I know several of you joined all of them, and some of you have just dipped in and out. So a big thank you to all the speakers presented, and also the questions that have been posted. Obviously, as I said in my introduction to this session, it wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship and the support of a number of key headline and associate sponsors of our annual events. So again, can I thank you personally for your continued support, and also to draw to your attention that 2021 is our 10th anniversary, independent of the Department of Health, and I hope we can go even bigger and better, although I'm sure Lois and Jerome will be sort of having sleepless nights hearing that. But as I said, it is 10 years on since the Department of Health, and it's been great that we've been able to continue. And people may not know behind the scenes, we get no government funding at all. We're completely crowdfunded and sponsored by a select number of organisations. We are always inviting more to join the family of sponsorship, but that enables us to keep both our learning events, such as the digital happy hours, free. It means we can publish resources and keep those for free, and also maintain and curate a website that is very well regarded across housing, health and social care. And again, we have some very great partners who sponsor key topic areas. So do have a conversation with me and the team if you want to be more closely affiliated with the LIN in that way. One of the advantages for us is both in terms of how we can promote you, but also enables us to maintain a presence around really high-level thought leadership, innovative ideas, working as a non-academic partners with research projects, and like Nick, how we can inform and influence policy to make lives better for an ageing population. So again, we welcome the conversation with you. Finally, just want to say some administrative stuff to say that all the slides and the recordings will be available to everybody initially through our microsite, and then we'll open it up through the broader membership on the website. I'm sure Jerome will also correct me if I've got that wrong. Can I just personally thank you all for joining us. Thanks all the attendees, the over 800 people who've joined us through the week for making this summit such a success. And from the Housing LIN behind the scenes, well done Lois and Jerome in particular, but also Ian and Darius, who provide our consultancy support, where we pick up a lot of really good quality initiatives that are coming through. And my final comment is season's greetings, and let's hope 2021 promises to be a better year than 2020. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.